Corley. It's actually in rules I want to commence, Taoiseach. Yesterday was one of the most bizarre days we've ever put down in here on a number of fronts. But, you know, we have, as a country, a limited judiciary in operation. Yesterday, the executive basically went into isolation. Then this chamber, the legislature, stopped for a period of time. Three arms of the state. Really, I just want to know what happened yesterday as regards that. If you'd write to the leaders of the opposition as regards how it all ended up, going into suspension or all of that, and just detail how it happened. I asked the Count Corley, and in fairness, he has written to me. I'd like you to do the same, because I'd like to know what happened. I did ring you, obviously, and in fairness to you, you rang me back, and you considered it, and we came back. But I'd like to know the detail as to that, because the reason I ask is this could happen again. We just need a contingency plan, right? Let's look at issue. Simon Coveney is going through very, really deep negotiations and discussions in relation to the future, obviously with Brexit. And we need to know that there is a contingency plan in relation to the executive and in relation to these houses, Count Corley. And can you communicate one to us subsequently as well? Second issue is in relation to what was launched yesterday. And look, we need to move on. We need to get the country behind what I support this plan. The Labour Party supports this plan. But I don't understand, Taoiseach, why yesterday you didn't actually come to us all in advance and say, look, we're not ready for this. We want to align with NEFID advice so that we could slot everything into the 1 to 5, could have a heat map on every county and say, these are where the counties are at, these are the 5 stages, instead of having a hybrid situation for Dublin. Because I actually didn't know what to tell people in Dublin yesterday. And I really would like clarity on the following. I know people who are going to weddings outside Dublin. Should they go? I have a coach operator in my own constituency who has 14 people re-employed and can't go back on PUP payments, but their bookings are for the west of Ireland and the majority of the people are from Dublin. Should they go? Just be clear. Should they go? Should they go? Should those who are taking trips down the country, who are probably don't have children, have waited till September, should they go? The Irish people will support you. Just be clear. And Taoiseach, the other thing I want to say very clearly is, will you come out with a communications plan to everybody in the country? Remember, the majority now of infections are from people under the age of 45. How we communicate with them is different to traditional media. Fair play to the Irish Times. I know your own party tried to jump on the bandwagon with regards to this, but fair play to the Irish Times. It is the best example of how to communicate this. I'm asking you, will you put in place a plan to communicate that across social media and into every house in Ireland for the next 6 months? Thank you.
Could I first of all say, in relation to the first point, and I did take the phone call from Deputy Kelly, and I fully appreciate your concerns, which I think are genuine, but I think it's fair to say also that the people involved, first of all, the Dáil was adjourned, I think, for 2 hours. Sorry, about 6, well, sorry. Would you, I think, Deputy McLaughlin, you should calm it. You're very excitable. I think you should calm down. You're interrupting non-stop. So the point is, basically, that the CMO, when the news emerged of Stephen Donnelly's test, the Secretary-General of the Department contacted the CMO. The CMO, in what might be described, and he's using his own language, in an overabundance of caution, said ministers should restrict their movements. Okay? The Secretary-General was anxious that the Chief Whip would get that message and he would communicate it to the clerk of the Dáil. And that transpired, that there was ramifications to the Dáil and that senior ministers were being told they couldn't, or it would be unwise, given the meetings that had taken place the day before. There was a substantial number of meetings that Stephen Donnelly attended with ministers, and if he had tested positive, there could be a risk involved. And I suppose the call was made, they didn't want to expose any other people to risk. It's as simple as that. And I think everyone acted in good faith. And when I became aware of the situation, then I think the point was made that ministers of state could cover for senior ministers. But that said, not in all cases, obviously. And I think I communicated, I think it was with the clerk, with the chief whip present, and made the point that, look, I'm willing to, I'm of a view that the Dáil should resume. I think we communicated that, and that Ministers of State would be available to take whatever, and then I signed the summons to enable that to happen. That's it. And I think we are in COVID-19. For example, I had to change my interview with RT. It was due to be held in the office of An Taoiseach. I contacted the CMO. Was it advisable to go ahead with the interview? He felt it wasn't actually in that context. So as you can see, I went outdoors by the fountain and had an interview with RT at a long distance with microphones. So correct. But I'm just making the point. Everybody acted in good faith. It was a precautionary motivation to try and prevent the risk. That's it. And there's no big mystery to it other than that. And that's it. And so the next question, in terms of the plan itself, the plan fundamentally is about protecting lives and livelihoods. It's there for the long haul, for the next 6 months to 9 months. And that's its ultimate test in terms of its sustainability. The NEFIT advice came in advance of the plan in relation to Dublin. We felt it was better to implement that advice right now, because NEFIT in its advice to government was very clear that it didn't feel, it obviously has very strong issues and very concerned, but I just want to make this point. It didn't advise that we move to level 3 at this point in time, because of the current epidemiological data, that does not strongly support a move to level 3 at this time. So it did recommend those particular advices then, and we followed through them. Yeah.
In the short time I have, Taoiseach, will you put in place a contingency plan for the future for the Executive and for the Houses of the Oireachtas working with the County? Well, for the Executive it is. For the Executive it is. Secondly, in fairness, will you just, it doesn't have to be here, we're not about catching you out, would you please tell the people of Dublin whether they should go to weddings, go to hotels, and the tour operators, yes or no? It's very simple, yes or no. Or if you don't, I'll challenge just yes or no. It's a very simple question. They have to make decisions now. And finally, will you take on board what I've suggested as regards communication strategy? Again, yes or no. You often ask, it's not, well, if it's done, it's been a disaster. This is the best example we've seen. Finally, Taoiseach, this was the letter that was written from NEFIT to Stephen Donnelly on the September the 11th. It obviously digresses. It's the advice given. At that time, it was 42.34. It's now at 53 as regards infection rate. It obviously gives different recommendations as regards some things, sports, public pubs, etc. Now, will you please, if you're going to follow NEFIT advice, that's fine. But when you deviate from NEFIT advice, will you please in future publish the NEFIT advice and also outline where the government differentiates? Because, in fairness, I haven't got an issue if you're saying socio-economic factors mean that you're not taking certain parts of the advice. In fact, in many cases, I will support you. But please at least be clear to distinguish between what you've been advised on and what you're actually doing, because they're not the same.
I've just on the Dublin, I've made it clear that people should not travel outside of Dublin. They're advised not to travel outside of Dublin if possible. That's the NEFIT advice. I said it to you yesterday. I'll say it again today. I said it publicly on the 6-1 News also. So did the Taoiseach later on prime time. A leaflet is going out to every household. That had already been decided as part of the communications plan, okay? And there's very extensive planning around the communications of the plan itself in terms of the various levels and so on. And in terms, sorry? No, sorry, apologies. And in terms of NEFIT advice, I've given you very specific NEFIT advice that we have followed in relation to Dublin, which we did follow in terms of accepting that advice as a decision of government. And yes, from time to time there can be, and there has been from the beginning. I mean, the roadmap itself, the original roadmap, wouldn't have been 100% perhaps as advised by NEFIT. That's as a natural interface. You were one of the first to come into the House and say that NEFIT was maybe too, but which I don't, and I wouldn't entirely agree with all of that. I think we have to, overall I think public health advice is key to dealing with the pandemic. And that was the original position we all adopted in this House. And when I was in opposition, I took a very strong position. But I took a very strong position of supporting public health advice from the outset of this pandemic as an opposition leader. I didn't seek in any, I'm not saying you are, no, don't get me wrong, but didn't seek to play politics with it or seek political advantage.
Thank you,
over the
Taoiseach.
pandemic.
Time is up.